Somewhere in Coca-Cola's top-secret labs in Atlanta, a classified project was underway. Codename, Project Kansas. Why Kansas? Because it was flat, simple, American, exactly what they wanted the world to think about their new strategy. Roberto Goizueta, the Cuban-American president of the company, knew he needed a definitive answer to Pepsi's threat. In Atlanta's climate-controlled labs, chemists worked day and night to uncover the secret behind consumers' preference for Pepsi, the sweeter taste. The legendary 7X formula, guarded for nearly a century as the most closely held secret in the corporate world, was about to be altered for the very first time. But there was an additional element in play, replacing traditional sugar with high-fructose corn syrup. This change wasn't just about taste, it was about economics and mass production. $4 million were invested in research. Picture this. In today's money, that would be over $12 million spent solely on taste tests. Nearly 200,000 interviews were conducted in cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami, and Dallas. The result? Impressive. The new formula not only beat Pepsi in blind tests, but also pleased 75% of the consumers tested. But there was one detail the executives in Atlanta completely overlooked, and that detail would prove costly. The 23rd of April, 1985. Lincoln Center, New York City. TV cameras focused on two men in impeccable suits, Roberto Goizueta and Donald Keough, Coca-Cola's president and vice president. Under the flashes of photographers, gleaming cans of the new taste of Coca-Cola reflected the studio lights. Goizueta promised a smoother, bolder taste. His words echoed through the loudspeakers as journalists from coast to coast broadcast the news. For the first time in 99 years, Coca-Cola was changing its formula. Wall Street reacted positively. Stocks rose. Everything seemed perfect. In the first days after the launch, 150 million Americans tasted new Coke. Sales rose 8%. In Atlanta's offices, champagne was served. It looked like Project Kansas had worked flawlessly. But then, something unexpected began happening on the streets of cities like Seattle, Phoenix, Nashville, and Boston. Something no market test, no multi-million-dollar research could have predicted. Something that would turn this apparent triumph into the greatest marketing disaster in corporate history. What exactly happened? The answer will surprise you. In Atlanta, the company's call center, which usually received a few hundred calls a day, suddenly found itself overwhelmed. First, it was 1,500 daily calls, then 8,000. Operators could barely keep up. The 1-800-GET-COKE line became a national confessional of anger and nostalgia. But it wasn't just about taste, it was about identity. In small towns across Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, the heart of America consumers reacted as if a sacred symbol had been defiled. One outraged consumer from Arkansas wrote to the company, "There are two things in my life, God and Coca-Cola. Now you've taken one of them away." In Seattle, the Society for the Preservation of the Real Thing emerged. In San Antonio, the Old Cola Drinkers of America was born, claiming to have recruited 100,000 members in just a few weeks. Protest groups organized in Houston, Denver, Portland. It was as if a silent revolution was unfolding, one can at a time. The most surprising part? Psychologists hired by Coca-Cola itself discovered that many consumers spoke of the original Coke as though they were mourning the death of a beloved relative. The brand wasn't just a drink, it was part of the American soul. And meanwhile, on the other side of the world, someone was watching and laughing. While Atlanta burned in metaphorical protests, something extraordinary was happening in Texas. A businessman from San Antonio had spent $1,000, a small fortune at the time, buying up every case of original Coca-Cola he could find. He wasn't alone. Across the country, from Miami to Seattle, through Chicago and Phoenix, people were buying case after case of the original formula, stockpiling them in garages, basements, even rented warehouses. It was as if they were preserving relics of a lost civilization. In Atlanta, executives watched the numbers with growing despair. No matter that 75% of consumers said they would buy new Coke again, no matter that initial sales had risen 8%, the reality on the streets was different. The company was losing something more valuable than market share. It was losing the soul of its brand. Donald Keough, the company's vice president, walked through the Atlanta office hallways, looking at maps of America pinned with red tacks, each representing a city where protests were intensifying. Denver, Colorado; Nashville, Tennessee, Birmingham, Alabama, New Orleans, Louisiana. The revolt was spreading like wildfire. And then, in an executive meeting that would go down in history, someone asked the question no one wanted to voice. What if we brought the original formula back? What happened in that boardroom would forever change the history of global marketing. Before we begin this part, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. It motivates me to keep making videos in this format. Turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted when I bring the next video as soon as possible. The 11th of July, 1985. Exactly 79 days after the launch of New Coke. At ABC Studios in New York, the soap opera General Hospital was interrupted for a special broadcast. Donald Keogh appeared on screen with an expression mixing humility and relief. "You told us loud and clear that you wanted the original formula back, and we listened." The news spread faster than any ad campaign ever could. Radio stations from coast to coast broke into programming. Extra newspapers were printed. In just 2 hours, Coca-Cola's Atlanta call center received more calls than in the entire previous month. But this time, they were calls of celebration. Within 48 hours, 31,600 Americans had called to say thank you. It was as if a beloved relative had returned from the dead. On the streets of Atlanta, people hugged and celebrated. In Seattle, the president of the Society for the Preservation of the Real Thing declared victory. In San Antonio, the businessman who had spent $1,000 stockpiling original Coke became the most popular man in town. Coca-Cola Classic as the original formula was now branded returned triumphantly. But this time, it carried something new, the weight of nostalgia, longing, and redemption. It was the same formula, but with a completely transformed meaning. Wall Street reacted positively. Sales skyrocketed. In just 3 months, Coca-Cola Classic not only regained its market position but grew beyond pre-New Coke levels. It was as if the company had accidentally discovered the formula for perfect marketing, making people feel nostalgia. But one question lingered in the air, whispered in corporate hallways from Madison Avenue to Hollywood. In the years that followed, a theory began circulating through the marketing circles of New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. Could it be that the entire New Coke saga had been planned from the start? A stroke of marketing genius disguised as a colossal blunder? Think about it. Coca-Cola had been losing market share to Pepsi for a decade. Conventional marketing attempts weren't working. The brand needed something to reconnect emotionally with consumers. What could be more powerful than the threat of loss, followed by a triumphant return? Wall Street market analysts started connecting the dots. The extensive research, the $4 million investment, the 200,000 interviews, all of it seemed excessive for a simple formula change. And why completely remove the original formula from shelves? Why not offer both options from the very beginning? In Atlanta, Coca-Cola executives vehemently denied any prior planning. Sergio Zyman, the company's marketing director, insisted that the consumer reaction had been completely unexpected. Roberto Goizueta maintained that the decision to bring Classic back was purely reactive. But the numbers didn't lie. In 1986, 1 year after Classic's return, Coca-Cola sales were 10% above pre-New Coke levels. The company had not only regained market share but expanded its base of loyal consumers. It was as if millions of Americans had rediscovered their love for the brand. The truth? We'll probably never know. But one thing was certain, planned or not, the result was extraordinary. Now we arrive at the number that gives our story its title, $93 billion. How did we reach this astronomical figure to measure the cost of New Coke? Wall Street financial analysts calculated that if Coca-Cola had maintained its 1,970 seconds growth trajectory without the New Coke interruption and factoring in lost market value, research and development costs, extraordinary marketing expenses for the Classic relaunch, and above all, the lost opportunity during those crucial 79 days, the total would amount to $93 billion in today's value. But there's a fascinating irony in this calculation, because, paradoxically, the tragedy of New Coke may have been the best unintentional investment in marketing history. The company emerged from the crisis stronger, more beloved, and more valuable than before. In 1992, 7 years after the fiasco, New Coke was rebranded as Coke 2 and continued to be sold in niche markets. Some people really did prefer the sweeter taste, but its market share never exceeded 1%. In 2002, with no significant demand, the company permanently discontinued its production. The original formula remained sovereign, and the lesson was clear. Some things simply should not be changed, no matter what market tests say. And so we reach the end of our journey, back to that cold Coca-Cola you might be drinking right now. But now you know, that familiar taste carries with it one of the greatest lessons in global business history. The first lesson: a brand doesn't belong to the company that created it. It belongs to the people who love it. Coca-Cola discovered this the hardest way possible. Millions of consumers weren't just drinking a soda, they were drinking childhood memories, shared moments, an emotional connection that transcended chemistry and sugar. The second lesson: market tests can never replace cultural understanding. No matter how sophisticated those 200,000 interviews were, they failed to capture something essential: the brand's symbolic meaning. It was like trying to measure love with a calculator. The third lesson: sometimes the greatest mistake can become the greatest victory. New Coke failed spectacularly, but that failure sparked something no ad campaign ever could: a global wave of renewed love for original Coca-Cola. Donald Keogh, in his trademark wisdom, summed it all up with a phrase that became legendary. Some critics will say Coca-Cola made a marketing mistake. Some cynics will say we planned it all. The truth is, we're not that dumb, and we're not that smart.